It's Wednesday, May the 16th, and we are live for some more college basketball talk, as always, on the CBB Central podcast. I'm Kevin Sweeney, along with my good friend Brad Cavallero. We are excited because it's NBA Draft Combine week, which means we're coming up on some decisions. Lots of guys who have signed, who are entered the draft without signing an agent, guys who have been signing with agents over the last few days. So we figured we'd bring a lot of that to you in this podcast, as well as kind of just touch on all the typical player movement stuff that we try to get to on every podcast this time of year, as there's always so much action. But Brad, how you doing today, my man? It's been about a week since we last spoke. There's been a lot of college basketball action. I was disappointed to see Matt Mooney not head to Northwestern, but we'll touch on him later in the show. But otherwise, I can't really complain.
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good, Kevin. Very excited for the combine where we can start to get some clarity on guys who will be staying and leaving, get some clarity on these rosters. And I was worried too. Wanted to do a podcast early in the week this week, but there wasn't a ton of news. But yesterday, more than made up for it and gave us a full slate of things to talk about.
Absolutely. So we can get right on into it. As we said, the NBA Draft Combine is this week out here in Chicago. I will not be making an appearance at the NBA Draft Combine. I've been told credentials are quite hard to come by. Given that and the fact that I have plenty to do here, I figured I would just take a pass on that one, but I'll certainly be monitoring things there. The combine is this week. I believe it begins today, actually. Over the next 4 days, they'll have measurements on players. They will have interviews with teams, and there'll also be 5-on-5. Several guys are playing 5-on-5. That'll be interesting. That list is still kind of coming out, I believe. I know Brian Bowen is playing 5-on-5, so that's exciting enough, I suppose. But let's touch on a couple of guys who are at the combine who just announced they would be staying in the draft for good and would be signing with agents. Kyrie Thomas from Creighton, Jacob Evans from Cincinnati. Brad, two guys who are, I would say, stars in college basketball, really good players, and would be All-American type players if they stayed for their final season of college, but at the same time didn't have too much left to prove. Can't say I'm stunned by either decision. Sort of selfishly hoping that they would stay in school, but two guys who I think will have a chance to be first-round picks.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the reason why we're not surprised that they're leaving is because they're stars, and because they're stars, they really don't have anything else to prove. I think both are kind of mid first round picks. I've seen that with Kyrie Thomas, some people have them. Some people have Thomas close to the lottery, like myself, and other people have him like as a second rounder, which doesn't make a ton of sense to me. But in the NBA draft, you really only need one team to like you. So if he falls to late 20s and one of these teams in the lottery sees he's falling, they could trade back or buy a late first rounder to pick him up. I mean, he's just such a useful piece, both offensively and defensively. He has a 6'11" wingspan. He is an improved shooter. He improved his ability to create off the dribble, which kind of vaulted him into this first round conversation. And from Creighton's perspective, they are in a lot of trouble. He and Marcus Foster were heavily relied upon to create most of the offense for them. Both of them are gone, and this Creighton roster, there's just not a whole lot of experienced talent there. I think they're probably a year away from being good again. I think next year they could finish towards the bottom of the Big East. So it's a pretty impactful move here from Thomas.
Yeah, I definitely think Creighton's in a tough spot now. There's not really a ton out there grad transfer-wise that can help them. I thought Brock Stahl was kind of a natural fit for both them and Northwestern when Mooney announced he was headed to Texas Tech. But instead, Stahl committed yesterday to Minnesota, was also looking at Valparaiso. So from that perspective, I think Creighton's in a tough spot. As for Thomas, I can kind of understand the trepidation, but I can also understand the upside. It's like, obviously, as you mentioned, the wingspan, his improved shot creation. He was very efficient this season. He was a 50-40 guy. Shot 54% for the field, 41% from three. Obviously, didn't have to create quite as much because Marcus Foster did a lot of that, and part of that's the system that Greg McDermott employs does get you good looks. But combine the good shooting with the great defense that he's going to provide, and you've got like 3-and-D potential right there as a useful rotation player. I think some people aren't necessarily going to bet on the upside, and that he's really just a shooter and undersized, basically two guard who can defend a little bit, or not defend a little bit, defend a lot. And if you see him that way, I don't really think he's worth a first-round pick, maybe a late first-round pick if you're a team that's contending and just wants to add, like, if you're the Warriors and you can add a guy who shoots 40% from three and just like comes off the bench for 8 minutes a game and defends, like, he's worth a first-round pick. But there's a lot of teams that, like, in that late first round are looking for a star, where you might want to draft, say, a Mitchell Robinson, a Brian Bowen if you were to stay in the draft, Anthony Simon, someone like that, who has that like superstar potential down the road. It all kind of just depends on your draft philosophy. As for Evans, he's a guy I'm not quite as high on as some people are. I thought he was very solid at Cincinnati. I don't love the shot. I mean, he shot 37% from three this year, 41% a season ago. So it's kind of betting on that. The 37 is a decent number. I'm interested to see how it translates. I don't think he's like an elite shot creator, but he does give you stuff on both ends. Because he's a good defender. I think he's going to find his way into being a rotation player in the league, but I don't think he has nearly the upside that maybe Kyrie Thomas has.
Yeah, I think that Evans is also kind of in that same late teens to mid 20s range. He's also a very good passer. I think he averaged like over 3 assists a game. And so many teams need wings. That's the one thing that really stands out when making these mock drafts. Well, actually, the three things really is, a ton of teams need wings. There are very few power forwards, and there are way too many centers. Those are my three takeaways from making a mock draft. And Evans is definitely going to find a home. Teams like Minnesota, Indiana desperately need a wing who can hit shots and can handle the ball, make plays off the bench. Especially Minnesota, they have very little depth. So he has plenty of landing spots. I also don't think that he's necessarily a star, but I think he's a pretty safe pick. And in terms of the impact from Cincinnati, it's also pretty crushing. But I don't think anyone thought that he was going to come back to Cincinnati. Looking at their roster, Jerron Cumberland's now their best player. He's going to need to step up. This is a borderline NCAA tournament team for me, pretty much just based on the fact of Mick Cronin and Cincinnati's pedigree. They really lack talent. They need guys who were former role players, former 8 to 10 minute a game guys like Trey Scott and Niger Brooks to step up and take a major step forward. It's a lot to ask. It's doable, but I wouldn't bet on Cincinnati being anywhere near as good as they were this year.
Yeah, I personally don't see Cincinnati as a tournament team right now. The only thing that kind of makes me bet on it is A, the pedigree, as you said, and B, the American Conference is going to be pretty bad next year. They're going to be really good defensively because Mick Cronin teams have been. So if they can just find enough scoring, they can win enough games that maybe they find their way in. But they don't really have any recruits coming in that are of too much to note. Logan Johnson is coming out of the California area. He's a kid who I believe he's related to Tyler Johnson of the Heat, who played at Fresno State. He's a solid point guard. I think he has some upside long term, but I don't think he's a guy who's going to come in and be a huge difference maker. LaQuill Hardnett is from the DMV area at Perry Hall. He had good interest, but I don't think he's also a guy who comes in and makes a massive impact, along with JUCO Rashawn Fredericks. He's a wing. I actually like his game a fair amount. I know a lot of people are pretty high on him. Once again, though, I don't think he's a guy who comes in and is a 10 to 12 point a game scorer. So they're going to need offense from somewhere. I don't know if that comes from Kane Broome. I certainly wasn't that high on Kane Broome. We've touched on him on the pod a couple of times. I wasn't too high on Kane Broome last season. So it'll be really interesting to see with this Cincinnati team what Mick Cronin can do. They've been a team that's been really quiet recruiting wise this cycle. Like, they haven't really been involved with too many transfers. I would have expected them to be trying to get a grad kid. They haven't really done that. So beyond Jerron Cumberland, I don't really like this roster.
Yeah, I think that Cincinnati definitely needs a sit-out point guard, even a sit-one, play-one. because both Broom and Jennifer are seniors. In terms of their lineup construction, I think Cumberland's a lock. Scott and Brooks are pretty much locks at the 4 and the 5. And then you'd think Justin Jennifer was a starting point guard last year. He kind of split it with Kane Broom. So one of those two will be the starting point guard. So that just leaves that other wing spot. And I wrote an article about this for Busting Brackets the other day. Pretty much comes down to 4 people. Rayshawn Fredericks, who you touched on, was a JUCO All-American, kind of the perfect mix of all 4 options in terms of size, experience, and shooting. And they also have you could use Kane Broom off the ball, but that'd be a very small backcourt with him and Justin Jennifer. But he does have that kind of scoring background. And then the other 2 options are rising sophomore wings, Trevor Moore and Keith Williams. Keith Williams is kind of like that physical, tough, athletic slasher wing, whereas Moore is more of a shooter. So they have options. I think Fredericks is the best option, but they really need guys to step into bigger and more impactful roles if they want to potentially win or even move up in the American Conference.
Absolutely. A lot of questions around that whole league, so it's going to be fun to watch going forward. One more name at the Combine to touch on, or not at the Combine, before we head to Sleepers and Overrated. Jared Vanderbilt from Kentucky. He will not attend the Combine. This is kind of one where I saw the headline. I was like, why would Jared Vanderbilt, whose stock is very questionable, not attend the Combine? Then I realized he wasn't going to be able to work out, and it's a little more understandable. I don't really see why he'd return to Kentucky at this point. I can understand I'll try to improve my draft stock, but he's also one injury from not getting drafted. I think someone would draft him this year if he doesn't enter. So from that perspective, if I'm Jared Vanderbilt, I'm going in and getting my, whatever it is, a 2-way deal, a second, just a normal second round contract, and getting into the league and working my way up from there, because I certainly have the talent to compete at that level.
It's a tough situation because I think before the season he was seen as a definite first round pick, and I think he showed a lot during his limited time at Kentucky, specifically his rebounding and his energy, and with the lack of power forwards in this draft, I think he would definitely get drafted. But returning to Kentucky would be such a boom or bust move, where if he gets hurt again, that's pretty much it for him and his stock. But if he legitimately played well, he could definitely move up into the lottery next year. But it might just be too big of a risk, and the move might just be, stay in this draft, be the 45th pick, and maybe go on the Harry Giles plan where they don't play you a lot, like in case you're injured, or try to make the team out of training camp.
Vanderbilt's interesting. Last season at Kentucky only averaged 17 minutes a game in the 14 games that he did play. Had almost 8 rebounds per game in that stretch. You guys can do the math. That's some pretty ridiculous numbers in terms of per 40 rebounding numbers. The guy is just a monster down low, but the shooting percentages, he only shot 43% from the field. For a guy who's going to be a big, that's really tough to sell for me. That's the thing, is what do you profile Jared Vanderbilt as? I mean, probably a 4, but you're not playing a 4 that can't shoot in the NBA. So I think he might just stick best. I see he's listed at 6'9", 215. Do you just play him as a small ball 5 who's just energy and rebounding, kind of like Jordan Bell with the Warriors?
I think that you can play him at the 4 in the right lineup because he can also handle the ball and get the rebound and push the break. So I mean, if you have a center like Kelly Olynyk who can shoot, or even if you have a normal kind of back to the basket second unit center, or maybe on the Pacers, they have Domantas Sabonis as the backup 5, and you could have Vanderbilt at the 4, and then you gotta throw some shooting in there and in the perimeter. But I think that you can make it work. I understand that the shooting is a major limitation and definitely limits Vanderbilt as a player, but that rebounding and the versatility and the ball handling from the big man spot is very appealing to me.
Right. That's the only concern for me is just the shooting. Just because he didn't show any, ability to shoot the ball. It wasn't like he was shooting 20% from three. Like he just flat out wasn't taking them. Which kind of tells me everything I need to know. I do think that you could play him as a four in the right lineup. I think that just kind of energy hustle guy like Jordan Bell might be right now his best fit as he develops as a player. Maybe he goes beyond that. Um, we both put together some sleepers and some overrated guys for the combine who are participating. Some of these guys have signed with agents, others haven't. So, Brad, do you want to start us off with a couple of your sleepers?
Okay, so I wrote an article for Busting Brackets on these sleepers with about 300 words each of details. So hopefully we can go into more detail on the podcast. But my first sleeper was Javon Carter from West Virginia, senior point guard, so age is working against him, but he shoots the ball extremely well. He's an excellent defender, and he would fit in on so many teams as that backup point guard, or even as a backup shooting guard. He is 6'2", which is a little small, but with the emphasis on small ball in the NBA, it's not completely unrealistic. But he's an absolute ball hawk on defense, and I think he would be a great fit on a lot of the teams in the late first round. Maybe Atlanta needs a backup point guard. Boston, if Marcus Smart leaves and Shane Larkin leaves, could use another guy there. The Warriors too. So I think I think the point guards that are currently above him, I don't see why. A guy like Aaron Holiday or like a Troy Brown. So I think that Carter has the necessary skills to fit in the NBA, and I think that's worthy of a late first round selection.
I like Carter. It's really interesting how the kind of philosophy on like sleepers. Like I think both of us pretty much know what Javon Carter is at the next level. And that's kind of the draft that I really love. That's probably my favorite part of the draft, is just watching teams and how they kind of see the draft. And obviously every team is in a different situation that causes them to say, oh, we're going to go all in and try to be, very aggressive and look for a star, or we're going to just find a role player who's going to help our team next year. Javon Carter can help most teams in the NBA next season. So I certainly agree. There's value there, late first, early second. One of my sleepers I had kind of goes along that theme. Kevin Huerter out of Maryland. I've been told that Huerter is getting some pretty, strong first round looks. I don't know if he'll stay in the draft. I think he has some things he can work on, especially his handle, to come back for one more year at Maryland. But I don't necessarily think I think he likes being at Maryland a lot. I don't necessarily know that he likes or benefits by playing for Mark Turgeon, who puts the ball in Anthony Cowan's hands the entire game and just has, I think, limits Huerter's role to a certain degree. Huerter's a guy, though, he's an elite shooter, shot 50% from the field, 42% from three, 76% from the free throw line, has some creation ability, good size, is actually like an underrated defender, I think. He had that one highlight always gets brought up, that chase down block against Georgetown his freshman season. But he's done he's made a lot of plays in his career on the defensive end. He's still not quick, and that's never going to be something he's going to like get to a point where he's like an above average athlete. But with his size and his scoring ability, like I definitely think he's a first round value. Will be really interesting to see A, if he plays 5-on-5 at the combine, and B, if he does someone see enough to give him a first round guarantee? I think that would make his decision a lot tougher.
Yeah, actually, Kevin Huerter was also my second sleeper on this list. And regarding the 5-on-5, I think the rule is if you're not in the top 30, based on polling the general managers or whoever represents each team for this polling purpose, if you're not in the top 30, I think you have to play 5-on-5. And so Huerter would be right on the cut line. I saw Jackson Hoy on Twitter said that he heard that Kyrie Thomas is going to have to play 5-on-5, which was surprising, but kind of tells you the level of prospect that's kind of on the fence right there. Yeah, Herder. I mean, he fits really well. So many teams need a wing, and guys like Minnesota and Indiana, like we talked about earlier, even Portland could really use a shot making wing. As Pat Connaughton is going to be a free agent, and they kind of lacked some bench punch after trading Allen Crabbe due to salary cap reasons. So I mean, Herder fits in a bunch of different places.
Yeah, and Herder's just generally like a really good kid and like a really like hard worker. Like he's gonna fit into a locker room and earn respect. He's not a guy you're ever gonna have a problem with. So from that perspective, nothing but added value there. Um, Looking at mine, I'll go with my next sleeper then, since I stole one with Herder. I had Josh Okogie.
He was my third one.
Okogie's a guy who I think a lot of people in kind of like NBA draft Twitter are really high on. I'll let you kind of go into your thoughts on him a little more. I just like his size. I think his measurements will be really key in terms of like wingspan and stuff. Even though he's a little undersized, like I just like his build. He flat out produced in college. Like he could create a little bit. He shot the ball well. He he's just a really like generally good basketball player, and I think that just kind of gets overrated this time of year.
Yeah, he was actually measured because both he and Herder were on the U19 team last summer that lost to Canada. And Okogie measured at 6'4" with a 7-foot wingspan. So that's very very promising. He can shoot the ball. He's very active defensively. He plays with a lot of energy. He's great at getting to the free throw line. He can create. That was another thing with Herder too. He averaged I think over 3 assists a game too. So these guys can do a lot of different things. They have good size, and teams need wings, and that's a great recipe to stick in the NBA at the current phase that the NBA is at.
Absolutely. I think everyone's going to do this thing of let's find the somewhat undersized guard who has the big wingspan and see if he's Donovan Mitchell. And I don't think Josh Okogie's Donovan Mitchell, but I think he's like absolutely a good NBA rotation player. Um, I think he's going to be a starter in the NBA at some point. So I'm really high on him. I'll be surprised if he heads back to Georgia Tech because I think someone's going to draft him in the first round.
Yeah, his game, like his skill set and his style of play, is exactly the same as Donovan Mitchell. I wouldn't bet on him being as good as Donovan Mitchell was, but I also didn't think that Donovan Mitchell would be this good. You mentioned that you think that Kobe is going to be a starter, and that's where I thought Donovan Mitchell would be. Hey, maybe Kogi is this hidden gem here.
Absolutely. Why don't we give you a chance to steal one of my sleepers instead of me stealing one of yours before
All
we
right,
go any further?
number 4 is Elise Johnson from Missouri State.
I did not have Alize Johnson. I nearly put him down.
All right, so um, I guess it's pronounced Alize Johnson.
I believe so. If I recall correctly from the media room when I went to Loyola, Missouri State, they had pronunciation guys, and I'm pretty sure it was Alize.
All right, so Alize Johnson, kind of a forgotten about prospect over the summer at the Adidas Nation camp, which had many of the top prospects, including a healthy Michael Porter and Mikal Bridges. Johnson was the MVP of that camp, and he supposedly really impressed. He kind of fell off the radar because Missouri State was projected by many to be the favorite in the Missouri Valley, and they kind of stunk it up there. And Johnson was also like a 43%, I believe, 3-point shooter last year, which dropped significantly to I think 29% this year. I wrote the article yesterday, so I think that those numbers are at least close. But Johnson's whole thing, he's an excellent rebounder. He averaged over 11 rebounds a game. He's a 6'9" power forward. He handles the ball extremely well. So he's not quite as athletic and powerful as Jared Vanderbilt, but he is a better shooter. And they both kind of fill that similar role as a kind of face up or like a perimeter 4-man who can handle the ball. They both rebound extremely well and can push the break themselves. So I think Johnson, he already proved how talented he was at that Adidas camp. I think he is definitely worth a second round flyer. And I know that there are some concerns about his frame. He's a little skinny, and his shooting is obviously a concern because it dropped so starkly this year. But I think he's certainly worth a second round flyer with the shortage of power forwards in this draft.
Johnson's intriguing to me because his shooting numbers really dropped across the board. he dropped down to 43% from the field, and 28% from three this year. So betting on the shot is really big. This is a guy who had sort of that trajectory of like an Anthony Davis, where he had a really late growth spurt. I believe he was like 6'3" when he was finishing up high school. Had one offer from St. Peter's, chose to go to junior college instead. Spent 2 years at junior college, grew to 6'9" like over that summer, and then was just is still like kind of developing his game out. So that's kind of how he developed those guard skills. So he's a guy. He's interesting because I don't know what I should blame on just like Missouri State just being a complete mess and having no coaching, and Alize Johnson kind of just falling off a little bit from last season. He's super athletic. My other concern with him is just with his size as that four. I think one of the things you kind of want to look for would be kind of that defensive impact guy where he can maybe block some shots, get some steals, get on the break, kind of wreak havoc with his bigger size and be able to switch on ball screens. I think he has that potential, but like didn't really show that at Missouri State. His steal and block numbers were pretty low. So he's a guy who I think is definitely worth a flyer, as you said. But I decided against kind of putting him on that sleeper list because I'm really not sure what to make of him, whether he's a guy who gets on a two-way next year and shows something or winds up just being a really successful European player overseas. Because I certainly think he's a very good basketball player. I'm just not entirely like all in on him being an NBA guy.
No, I can definitely see the hesitation. That's why I wouldn't say that he's a first rounder or even should be considered in the first round, but that second round flyer I think is definitely an option. Going into my fifth sleeper, Austin Wiley from Auburn. I don't know if you had him.
I did not.
All right, good. So we only had two overlaps, but Austin Wiley. So it's kind of I'm kind of conflicted because I don't know if I'm being hypocritical that I like Austin Wiley and don't like Udoka Azubuike because they're kind of similar. That they're about the same size, but I think Wiley has more potential in terms of like quickness and ability to defend. Wiley is 6'11" with a 7'4" wingspan. He was also on that U19 team with Herter and Okogie, and he played extremely well. He's a very active rebounder. He's a great back to the basket scorer, great interior scorer. He does not have a jump shot, and he struggles from the free throw line, which are the main concerns. But I think he could be a good center on a second unit. I think he's certainly worthy of a second round pick. Teams like the 76ers have a ton of second round picks and could use a backup center. Presumably they're not going to resign Amir Johnson, and Rashawn Holmes probably isn't part of their plan. But to have Wiley be kind of a contrast when Joel Embiid's out of the game, I think could be a nice little fit there.
Yeah, I think Wiley has some potential. I think he should go back to school and see what he can do at Auburn, but we'll kind of see what happens there. I have three more guys that I haven't mentioned. I'll start with the two who you mentioned, second unit punch. I think these two could give some second unit punch. Older guys, but are very good basketball players. Kenrich Williams and Deontay Mayton. Mayton's a guy who I haven't really seen a lot of draft buzz about, but I watched him in all places in that 3-on-3 tournament, and I watched the way he passes the basketball. And obviously, there's a lot more space in a 3-on-3 event than there is in a 5-on-5. But he was really able to showcase that fast passing ability. He can face up. He can shoot a three a little bit. Like there's a lot of things to like from Deontay Mayton. So I think there's some equity there as a second round pick. Kenrich Williams is another guy that I've seen like NBA draft Twitter is all over just because of his versatility, his creation ability, his ability to shoot the ball a little bit, defend multiple positions. I think he's useful on an NBA team. And then my last one real quick is Jonte Porter. I think a lot of people are really high on him. So maybe not like the typical sleeper. I just like am bonkers high on him just because of the way he played down the stretch last season. I think he has, like almost all-star potential. Like I wouldn't be surprised if he's an NBA all-star. Like I really love what he did down the stretch. So we'll be interested to see what Jonte can do in workouts with these teams. I would expect him to head to the NBA, not to the draft, not back to Mizzou, I should say, but certainly has a lot of talent.
Yeah. One other guy to mention, Omari Spellman I'm so much higher on him than everyone else that I must be missing something like very glaring. But everyone has him in like the 50s or like the 40s in their drafts, and I have him at 18 to the Spurs. I think. I mean, we talked on it on multiple podcasts, but his ability to shoot. He plays with a lot of energy. He's willing to rebound. He can block shots. He's very long. Um, you know, he played in a very modern offense at Villanova. So I don't know what the disconnect there is. I don't know if it's like people think he's going to come back, so they're just kind of throwing him in the second round. I don't know what it is, but I don't know how I can be so different on him.
I think it's kind of the tweener aspect where, like, is he necessarily a center? I don't know. I don't really think he is. Is he athletic enough to guard fours in the NBA? I don't know. Like, I think that's kind of where people are sitting, and not entirely sure on Spellman. I kind of lean towards you on the upside, but it's going to be pretty interesting to see what he does. I think I feel like he's leaning towards staying in the draft, but I think he'd be better served, returning for one more year.
Okay, so do you want to move on to our currently overrated players?
Sure, let's do it. I can start because we mentioned one of them. You did at least Troy Brown from Oregon. I just didn't feel like the production matched the hype this season, and it's still not matching the. It's one of the classic pick where it's like he wasn't really good in college, but like we still know what we like ranked him as a recruit, and so we're just kind of putting him there. Like if you if you gave Josh Okogie Troy Brown's recruiting ranking come out of high school and he did what he did, Josh Okogie would be like a top 10 to 12 pick. And Troy Brown had like a very like average to slightly above average season for a mediocre Oregon team, and is going to get picked in the lottery. We'll kind of see what happens there. I'm just not necessarily as high on him as most. Don't really buy the shot 29% from three this season. He's not a guy I'm super high on.
Yep. So Troy Brown was one of mine too. He was so hyped up. I mean, Oregon fans were pumping their chests all preseason about how great Troy Brown and how Troy Brown was going to be a lottery. And then when I made the top 25 right before the championship game, and I didn't include Oregon, and Oregon fans were mad, and I said, well, if Troy Brown comes back, I will definitely put them in the top 25. And they were like, well, he's not very good. So I mean, total 180 from his own fans. He was kind of billed as like this, big kind of point guard wing type, but he didn't play point guard, I don't think, and he was kind of unremarkable the whole year. He had a good season for a freshman, but not for where he was ranked in terms of a recruit. I have him currently as like a late second round pick. A early second round pick, excuse me. Maybe a team like the Hawks or Memphis at 31 or 32, but it takes a flyer. But he was pretty disappointing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go with my next one. Another guy who was quite disappointing in college. I don't really know what NBA teams really think of Trayvon Duval at this point. I don't even think I'd draft him. I just don't have any belief in the shot. It doesn't look good off the hand. And to be a point guard in the modern NBA and shoot as putridly as he did at times this season. I mean, the percentage was 29%, but guys were lagging off of him. A lot of his shots were very wide open, and he still shot that percentage. I'm just kind of turned off. The assist to turnover ratio was pretty solid, but when you have the best players in college basketball right around you, you should be pretty good at distributing. You like the size and the athleticism, but I don't necessarily see. Other than maybe just like a two-way flyer, I don't see a point in drafting him.
Yeah, I didn't have Duval on my list because I think that he might end up undrafted. Currently, I have him in the 50s. I think going to Oklahoma City at like 53 or something. But I'm like finding ways to keep him in my mock when I have guys currently on the outside looking in, like Vince Edwards, like Justin Jackson from Maryland, and like Caleb and Cody Martin, who I think have a very good chance of actually getting drafted. And I currently have them out, for a guy like Trayvon Duval, because I think maybe his reputation and his pedigree could get him selected. But I think on on June 21st, we're going to look up at midnight, and he's going to be, fighting for a two-way or like taking one of these training camp spots, going to summer league without being drafted.
Yeah, most recent NBA draft.net mock draft, which is one of the sources I enjoy looking at just because you don't feel like it's one from the same people you see on Twitter all the time. Has Trayvon Duval at number 30 to Atlanta. That's way higher than I would go. They have him drafted over Tony Carr, over DeAnthony Melton, looking just for like guards who can do both things. Keenan Evans, Javon Carter, Jacob, just Josh Kogi. Like there's a good amount of guys who I think most of the guys that are picked in the second round I would pick over Trayvon Duval at this point. The point guard is the deepest position in the NBA right now. I don't really see the equity in a guy who can't shoot.
Totally agree. Moving on to my second overrated, and that's Svi Mikhailuk. I was pretty shocked to see him at the combine. His whole draft prospect life has been his age. He was like a 17 or like a 16-year-old freshman at Kansas, and to this day, people say, "Well, Svi could be a second-round pick because he's pretty young for a senior." His whole thing is based on age. He was a pretty good college player this year. He ended up shooting the ball pretty well, which is, he was built coming in as a shooter. Struggled early in his career, like many shooters do, but never lived up to the hype. And even though he was a solid shooter this year, there are so many better two-way wings, I think, that would get picked over him. And this his whole illusion that he built up of being like this valuable prospect is totally age based.
Yes, Svi's interesting. The age thing I've never really quite gotten. It's like, oh, he's going to develop, and like he improved significantly every year at Kansas. So like I think that's sort of fair to say that he's still developing, but at the same time, like, is he ever going to get strong enough to defend in the NBA? I'm not sure. We didn't really see, like, I don't necessarily have a great sense of Svi's game defensively, just because at Kansas they used him a lot as like a small ball four, where like he'd sometimes have to guard fours, or like he'd guard physical threes, and LeGerald Vick would guard the four just because they were so small. But like Svi can shoot it. Like, I mean, he's gonna hit a lot of threes in the NBA. I just don't know if he's going to do anything else. I mean, his size and shooting ability is intriguing, if nothing else. We'll kind of see if anything else goes beyond that. I would agree that kind of that illusion is still kind of getting old. In that NBA draft.net mock draft, he is at 38 to Philly. I could see a team who has multiple multiple second round picks, like 2 or 3, maybe 4, like Philly has. I believe they have 4. Just taking a shot, because 6'8" shooters don't grow on trees. But I agree. I don't necessarily see the appeal. My third overrated guy is Mitchell Robinson. I put him overrated. I don't necessarily have an entire grasp of what he is as a basketball player. I just know that he's really raw and didn't spend this year developing as a college player. And would he have developed more in college than he would have doing individual workouts? I don't really know. But to me, I think he's really raw, and teams hoping to kind of draft him in that 15 to 20 range, and just hope they strike gold with a star. Seems kind of unlikely to me. I just don't necessarily trust his work ethic or the people in his corner. Maybe it's just because I'm scarred from dealing with that Western Kentucky situation all summer long, and I have old residual feelings against Mitchell Robinson, but I have him a little overrated for most.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, because no one's basing this off of anything beyond AAU. Like, that's like his whole profile is built on like this reputation in AAU of being this super athletic, super long, elite shot blocker, and we didn't really get to see how that translated to college. So that's a pretty big jump, almost like jumping from like rookie ball to the MLB, where like people make the comparison that like internet, like playing like in like the ACB is like AAA and college basketball is AA. Well, a high level AAU is is very competitive, but it's a totally different game.
Yeah, absolutely. I also don't necessarily. I mean, like, is there value in a rim runner who can block shots? Like sure. But I don't know that he ever develops into like any sort of shooter, any sort of post presence. So from that perspective, I don't necessarily buy the upside that some people have. I think I'd much rather draft a Jonte Porter, especially in the modern NBA. Um, who do you have number 3 for overrated?
Okay, I have Aaron Holiday. So I like Aaron Holiday as a player. I think he's a second round pick. But I've seen people have him in the teens. I've seen multiple people. I've seen someone has him 16 to the Suns. Someone else has him going to Milwaukee at 17. I mean, it's just way too high. You know, he's a great scorer. He's a solid playmaker, but he is out of control at times. And I don't see why he's any better than guys like Javon Carter, you know, Jalen Brunson, even like a Tony Carr. All these guys in that kind of late first, early second, or even like the whole second round tier. I don't see what makes him different or any better than you know, the glut of options that's already out there.
Yeah, I mean, he was awesome at UCLA. Um, I don't necessarily know that there's anything more there than what he did at UCLA. Like, I don't really see like a path for him developing and being better than that. That was an NBA player, but I don't know if it's like a first round pick. So we'll kind of see what happens there. My number 4 was Justin Jackson out of Maryland. Personally, I was just less than enthused, especially this season. I know he's battling some injuries. The shot was really bad this year. He shot 25% from 3. You like the free throw percentage at 83%. I think that shows the ability to shoot it eventually. And he had the 44% year shooting the 3 in his freshman campaign. I just don't think the production ever matched the hype, and he's a little undersized. I kind of see him as a tweener. I've just never really been as high on him as a prospect as a lot of people were.
Yeah, I mean, he was super disappointing in the 9 or so games he played this year. But I think he could end up getting drafted just because you know they're in the late second round there are not enough power forwards and there are too many like traditional centers. I think guys like Brandon McCoy are in trouble. I think he could fall out. Even a highly regarded international guy, Goga Bitadze, in my mock, I just couldn't help but keep on dragging him down. You know, teams just don't need these traditional centers, and that kind of opens the door for a guy like Justin Jackson, even though he was disappointing. You know, to maybe be selected late.
Yeah, I guess that's possible. Don't really. The power forward thing is interesting. I also just kind of depends on what you value him as. I mean, he's 6'7". Is that a 4? I think probably in the modern NBA can be a 4, but I don't know. We'll see.
I think he has a 7'2" wingspan, which would definitely help him there. In terms of my fourth overrated player is coincidentally also a power forward, and that's Keita Bates-Diop. I've seen him kind of anywhere from the late teens to the early second round. I kind of have him as a mid second round pick. I just don't think he's athletic enough. Like he's a good shooter, but his game is kind of based off like skill and craft, and I think he needs a little more athleticism to kind of stick as a power forward, especially as a first round pick. I think he's definitely worth a second round flyer, but I would not invest a first round pick in him.
Yeah, I guess that's pretty fair. Bates-Diop was just awesome this year for Ohio State, but I also like acknowledge the fact that he wasn't awesome before he had Chris Holtmann, and Chris Holtmann just brought in a system that was great and surrounded him and made him great. So I think that's something we just kind of have to monitor as far as how he looked in regards to the system that he played in. It really maximized his upside and his potential. But I think there's a little bit of 3-and-D equity, but as you said, I think the athleticism is the key, and we haven't seen it yet. My final overrated guy, this is going to sound strange, is Miles Bridges. I've kind of just never really cared for Miles Bridges' game. I don't. I mean, I think I'm one of those guys who like draft Miles Bridges at like 12, but not 8, and like that seems to be where everyone has him. Like I don't like everyone's so consensus that Miles Bridges is like a top 8 to 9 pick. and I think I'm like 12 to 14 because I don't love the creation ability. He seems kind of he's very mechanical in the way he plays. I'd be happy to be wrong because I think he's a pretty good kid. I just don't necessarily have never really seen it other than, I mean, he produced in college for sure, but I just never really was like, oh, this is a guy I really want on my basketball team next year as an NBA team.
No, I can totally see it. I mean, he's very stiff, kind of. But I think Philadelphia at 10 is probably where he ends up because I think Mikal Bridges will be off the board, and then Philly needs a wing there. And he can play the 3 and the 4. He's a good shooter, very good athlete. So kind of a minimal downside, especially if he goes to a place like Philly that has so many picks, and so it's not even their pick really. So it's kind of they don't have much to lose there. They have so many building blocks already. So I think that's a likely landing spot for Miles Bridges. My last guy was Tyus Battle. I think he's again because everyone needs wings. I think he'll be a second round pick. I don't see him as a first round pick. He had to do a lot for Syracuse, but he's not a great athlete. He's a solid creator, but I don't think he's as good as Malachi Richardson. And Malachi Richardson was obviously a first round pick who's now on the very very fringes of the NBA. So I think teams in the first round should definitely be wary of Battle.
Yeah, and I hate to do the thing where like I say that school never produces good players, so I wouldn't draft Tyus Battle, but like Syracuse's track record is not good. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind there. That was fun, Brad. I really enjoyed breaking those down. I think it's going to be really interesting to monitor the combine over the next couple days, and then coming up at the end of May, we'll have our draft decisions, and we can kind of finalize everything and really get into some nitty gritty projections for next season. Speaking of next season, the Gavitt games, we have our matchups in that John Rothstein announced in individual tweets for every single game because he had to get to his per source quota for the day. We've got St. John's at Rutgers, Ohio State at Creighton, Michigan at Villanova. That's probably the headliner. Wisconsin and Xavier, Georgetown and Illinois, Marquette at Indiana, Penn State at DePaul, and Seton Hall dealing with Nebraska. Brad, any matchup that really stands out to you? Obviously, Michigan and Nova is going to be the trendy one with the two teams coming off the national title appearance. Any other ones that really jump out?
So I think if Ethan Happ returns to Wisconsin, I think Wisconsin at Xavier is probably the second best game, and that's a very good game between two borderline top 25 teams. Same with Marquette and Indiana. Indiana with Romeo Langford is now kind of a borderline top 25 as long as Juwan Morgan returns to school, which I think he should. So that Marquette Indiana game is also very good. I think the most questionable matchups, I think Ohio State is much better than Creighton, and I think St. John's is much better than Rutgers. So I think those two probably should have been flipped. Should have been St. John's, Ohio State, Creighton, and Rutgers. And then I guess Seton Hall in Nebraska is interesting if Copeland and Palmer return from Nebraska and Seton Hall adds another piece. I know they're in the mix for Tremaine Isabel, who's currently the best grad transfer on the market. He's a scoring guard, so that could make that game pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think the matchups are overall pretty decent. I think Penn State kind of gets screwed. Penn State, I'm not sure. I'm not all that high on them next year without Tony Carr, but like playing at DePaul just kind of sucks. Like Penn State at Creighton would be a decent game for them. Penn State at Illinois, like excuse me, why would I say Illinois? Illinois is in the Big Ten. Excuse me. Penn State at even at Rutgers would be at least like fun. Also in the Big Ten. I'm really just struggling today. Sorry about that, everyone. Penn State against DePaul. That's just I just don't really see how that matchup benefits them. Might just go to watch them. We'll see what happens because I'll be in the Chicago area. But I think there have been a lot better matchups for Penn State. Brad, do you have a better matchup other than a Big Ten team that I've proposed twice?
Well, I think Penn State should be better than Illinois, and I think that Georgetown should be better than DePaul. So I guess Penn State and Georgetown. But Illinois and DePaul, I think, played this year. I don't know if you can play the same team back-to-back years. So that's something like the scheduling constraints, and also every team needs a certain amount of home and away. And then there's obviously 10 Big East teams, 14 Big Ten teams, so 6 Big Ten teams are out of it every year. Michigan State has yet to participate because it's always conflicted with the Champions Classic. But now that the season is kind of been pulled forward a week, and they have that contract commitment, I expect Michigan State to be in the Gavitt games going forward, which will be a nice boost for the event.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's always a fun one. I like these preseason events. I think they're just generally good for college basketball. Let's just run through a couple of player movement things. Mustafa Heron might be coming back to Auburn. It had been released that he was going to sign with an agent. It appears now he's very 50-50. That implies to me that he's probably coming back. That would be really big news for Auburn. I think it would make them much more clearly an NCAA tournament team. I think everyone kind of still thinks they were after losing what they lost, but they were, they had top 10 upside, then lost a lot of pieces. We'll kind of see what happens there, but Heron's very talented.
I think that they would be top 5 with Heron back. I mean, you'd have, as long as Brown and Harper come back in the backcourt, then you'll have Heron at the 3, and you'll have Chuma Okeke, who's a breakout candidate at the 4, and then either Austin Wiley if he returns, or Anthony McLemore if he's healthy at the 5, and then you have Malik Dunbar off the bench, Samir Doty, the VCU transfer. I mean, there's a lot to like there. I mean, Auburn still needs some bodies. As we were recording this, they added a Memphis transfer, Jamal Johnson, who's a sit 1 play 3, which is a good flyer to take with all the open scholarships they have and the limited playing time that they have to offer for next year. But Auburn's definitely trending in the right direction, and adding Heron would just further that narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not necessarily as high on them as most, because I felt like this season they had the us against the world mentality that they won't have again. But certainly would have all the talent in the world. Matt Mooney to Texas Tech, we touched on this a little bit. I tweeted this out that I thought Matt Mooney was a better fit at Creighton or Northwestern than Texas Tech, just because he'd have the ball in his hands a lot more, and he would get in that more pick and roll style that I think he's kind of better suited to play. Plus, he doesn't necessarily fit that Texas Tech attacking defensive mold. I got tons of responses from angry Texas Tech fans saying, "Oh, he wanted to play for Chris Beard, the elite coach," or "Oh, he wanted to play in a city with Whataburger," or "Oh." There was a bunch of really just annoying responses. So Texas Tech fans, I'm starting to see what you were complaining about. I said better fit. Someone said, "Curious why you say this. Texas Tech plays 10 players a game. He will fit great and be a senior leader." Okay, but wouldn't you rather play 35 minutes a game on a team that might make the NCAA tournament than play 20 minutes a game on a team that will make the NCAA tournament? Maybe that's just me. We'll kind of see what happens there. I think it's obviously a great get. I just don't know that it's necessarily quite as impactful as it could have been in other spots.
Yeah, Texas Tech fans are very angry these days. I mean, if Zaire Smith returned and they got Mooney, I would definitely have him in like the top 15. I also heard some rumors too that Kayvon Moore might flip his commitment because his connection to the school, the assistant coach, is now at Florida. I wouldn't bet too much on that. I think Moore is still going to be back. Moore is a top 50 freshman who is super talented, but he's known for his inconsistency. I think he's the starting power forward for Texas Tech. But this is an NCAA tournament team with Mooney. I do agree that Northwestern with Mooney would be better than Texas Tech with Mooney. And I mean, if he went to Creighton, he would get all the shots and all the minutes he could ever ask for, but he wouldn't play point guard. So I don't know what his priorities were, but I mean, he's going to play a lot. He's going to be the starting point guard, and Texas Tech should be in the NCAA tournament. So that's a pretty good fit all around. Moving to another school that had a lot of action recently, that's NC State. Obviously, the big news is they got Sasha Cleia-Jones, the Kentucky transfer. There were rumors that there was problems with his transcript, and that's why Pittsburgh and UNC backed off. But either way, This is a great flyer for NC State because he was a top 30 recruit. He's super talented. He showed a decent amount of potential at Kentucky, but he's a sit one, play two, and they have a 2-year grad transfer at center currently in Wyatt Walker, and pretty sure the number one JUCO player in the country in Derek Funderburk, who is a former top 70 recruit in his own right. So they have so much talent in the front court.
Can we just talk about for a second the irony in North Carolina, who obviously fake class school, saying no to a player's academic transcript? I just thought that was incredible.
It is. I mean, they're on their best behavior, I guess, now.
Unbelievable. Yeah, they also picked up Eric Lockett. He was a guy, I'm going to be completely honest, I follow the mid-major ranks. I didn't watch a lot of FIU this year. I did not know much about Eric Lockett. I don't think I'd even realized he was grad transferring. I saw his name pop, and I said, look at those stats. So he's definitely one of the better grad transfers available. Watched a little bit of tape of his, kind of that 6'5" do-it-all wing that does thrive in that Kevin Keatts system.
Yeah, he was someone who I had seen when he first announced he was grad transferring, but he had zero mention of any schools involved. And I did copious Twitter searches. I couldn't find any, not even a fan say we should get Eric Lockett. But then like one day later, boom, he's off to NC State. It's a great pickup. NC State fans are kind of concerned, and rightfully so, that Torin Dorn might be staying in the NBA draft, even though he won't get drafted. I mean, he's a very good player, averaged double figures for NC State, and would have been their starting small forward. Lockett adds a ton of depth to the perimeter. And I was planning on the podcast to remark that NC State, they're a top 15 team for me because they have experienced players at every position in their top 8, and it's a very talented group, and they won't have to rely on any of their freshmen to contribute immediately. And then Q, one of their top freshman recruits, Sadiq Bey, has decommitted and become the best available 2018 recruit on the market, primarily, I'm guessing, because of what I just mentioned, where none of the freshmen are going to play major minutes immediately.
Yes, and that will be very interesting because I saw a tweet from Evan Daniels that he expects Sadiq Bey, like terms of his release, to be he won't be allowed to go to an ACC school. Now his Final Four was, I believe, Pittsburgh, one other ACC school, Pitt, Miami, and then Chris Mack's club, Xavier. Now Chris Mack at Louisville. I will just throw it out there that Sadiq Bey, one of his 5 official visits was to Northwestern. That is the only official visit that he took that is not to a school that's in the ACC. Northwestern has a scholarship available, so we'll see what happens. I'm not going to say it's happening. I'm not going to say it's not happening, but it'd be great if it did.
I mean, you guys need a point guard more, I think.
Yeah,
but,
he doesn't really fit a need, but I mean, he's really good. So
it's the same. I mean, even with Louisville, I mean, they have guys like Jordan Nwora and Dwayne Sutton, but they like could use another wing like Bey. And then Xavier, one of their top targets, Elias King, is deciding in an hour, and I think he's going to Xavier. I don't know if that would influence Sadiq Bey at all, but Miami could really use him. So I would expect maybe he goes to Miami and they ask for the waiver. I mean, Cameron Johnson, kind of a different scenario, but he had a waiver to go from Pitt to UNC. So it's definitely a situation to monitor.
I had like forgotten that he'd officialed Northwestern. Like this was like came across, like I like was on 24/7, like reading it while we were talking about it, and was like, oh wait, that could be incredible. So we'll see what happens there. He did also include in his top 6. They got an unofficial but not an official visit, Princeton. He's a guy who cares about his academics. So maybe he wants to go to Princeton. Maybe he wants to go to another high academic school in the greater Chicago area. We'll see what happens. Either way, definitely the best recruit now on the market, and would provide a huge boost to pretty much any team that he could head to. A couple more things to touch on. Brock Stahl to Minnesota, Milwaukee grad transfer. He can play in the Big Ten. He'll be a useful rotation player. I think he would have been more fun to watch at a Missouri Valley school where he could have been a bigger star. But if you want to go to the NCAA tournament, I think Minnesota's got some pieces. Certainly a beneficial one. What do you think of Stahl?
Yeah, I actually wrote an article last night about this. Perfect six man for Minnesota. He can play both guard spots, a spot where they needed depth because their only perimeter reserves were Michael Hurt, who's kind of a subpar combo forward, and Gabe Kalasher, who is a 3-star shooter. So they definitely needed a veteran to come off the bench and play multiple positions. They have a ton of talent. They were bad this year because of a lot of injuries. And the whole Reggie Lynch situation. They should get Eric Curry back from injury. They should get Amir Coffey back from injury. The key for Minnesota is the play of Isaiah Washington, who's a top 60 recruit. Kind of disappointing this year, but had to play a bigger role than anticipated with all the injuries. So hopefully he can have a strong sophomore season and lead Minnesota back to the big dance.
Yeah, Stahl's just kind of useful. He can play the 1, play the 2, shoot the ball a little bit, rebound the ball, good size. He helps anyone. Austin Reeves to Oklahoma, sit 1, play 2 guy, was awesome at Wichita State. I think a lot of people thought highly of him. Thought maybe him and Greg Marshall didn't always see things on the same page. It looked for a bit like he'd go to Northern Iowa, but that kind of blew over. He was looking at a bunch of high majors, Purdue, Michigan, chooses Oklahoma. That backcourt in 2019 with Davion Harmon, who's an elite 2019 recruit, and Austin Reeves has a chance to be fun as hell.
Yeah, Oklahoma sneaky has like 6 or 7 seniors this year, so Reeves will have a ton of minutes for his own. I thought Purdue was also a really good fit because obviously they lose Matthias this year and they lose Ryan Klein next year, so he would play that kind of token shooting wing alongside a scoring guard in Carson Edwards and a kind of a big versatile point guard in Nojal Eastern. I thought there was a lot of fit there, but hard to fault him for wanting to play with Lon Kruger.
Yeah, absolutely. Not too many coaches I'd rather play with him. If I'm a guard who can score the ball. Devontae Bandu headed to Baylor, one of the top JUCO players in the country. That's a nice pickup, helps them out a little bit. City and Deer to Pitt, grad transfer from New Mexico State, another guy with some equity as a potential like 3-and-D wing. Couple of 2018s off the board. Isaac Likely headed to Oklahoma State, was a guy who was signed with Fresno State before the coaching change. The new staff at UTEP did push really hard to keep him signed with Rodney Terry. They couldn't do it. He heads to Oklahoma State. Also headed to Oklahoma State, Maurice Kalu, Oak Hill guy who kind of was a late riser, as well as, and then Robert Braswell is a 6'9", high upside wing. He's wing combo forward. He's headed to Syracuse. I've seen a lot of people really like that pickup. Anything stand out to you from those 5 guys, Brad?
So a couple notes about Devin Bandu. I saw South Carolina fans almost daily talking about how they really wanted him, how they thought they would get him, and how they thought he would be this kind of savior impact player that they needed to provide offense to the backcourt. So that's a crushing loss for them. He's a combo guard. Baylor has a fair amount of players in that area. I wonder if this means that they don't think that Makai Mason is going to be healthy. He and Jake Lindsey are the 2 kind of point guard capable players on the roster. Now they add Bandu. Robert Braswell was the top 2018 recruit available before Sadiq Bey reopened his recruitment. He's very high upside, can shoot, and is super athletic. Should fit as a reserve kind of 4-man in that Syracuse zone. Maurice Kalu, he was someone who actually at this time last year, Providence was in on pretty highly, but they ended up getting 2 combo forwards in Jimmy Nichols and Chris Monroe. Just didn't work out there. But from what I saw of him, I actually really liked his game. Kind of reminded me a bit of Rodney Bullock, who was on Providence this year. So that'll be a nice pickup for Oklahoma State. Also want to mention that there's besides Sadiq Bey and besides the center named DJ Burns, who just reclassified to 2018, there's not a single player in the 24/7 top 233 available. So there's very limited stuff out there. So the best available players are former decommits like Keontae Kennedy and Ed Chang. So I mean, there's just very very little out there to this point.
Yep. The other option is 2019 guys reclassifying. We saw one commit the other day who could reclassify, Francis Okoro to Oregon. Don't necessarily think he's needed next year at Oregon. There's been a lot of buzz about him reclassifying. He's a talent. Onyeka Ogangwu is a Chino Hills product, just like the Balls. He's headed to USC, not UCLA. But Andy Enfield is really cleaning up in SoCal. That's a really nice pickup for them, 2019. I do not expect him to reclassify. I haven't really heard too much buzz about him potentially reclassifying. One recruit to keep an eye on today, who's a 2019 as well, Paul Mulcahy. I think I butchered his name. New Jersey point guard prospect, who's an excellent. He's an excellent lead guard. He's 6'5", 6'6". The shooting has developed. He's a very great passer. Has incredibly good floor vision. He's a guy who is expected to. I think a lot of people expect Rutgers, although there's some other schools are involved. I know Northwestern's in. I believe Temple offered him a scholarship. There's a bunch of schools that are involved with Mulcahy. I guess it was a bit surprising to see that he was committing as soon as he is. So I guess it's not out of the question that he could look to reclassify. I would expect Rutgers here. I know Northwestern had an in-home. A bunch of people did in-homes in April, so maybe he just decided the time is right. You never know. Maybe he's looking at reclassing. We'll say Northwestern could absolutely use a point guard for this season. He is a point guard. Other team, Rutgers, does, I believe, have scholarships left to give. Let me just do the quick count here. I'm almost 100% sure they have enough scholarships where they could take him a year early if they wanted to.
Yes, they have one available because they have 11 players plus Jacob Young sitting out. So this 2019 guard could come early to Rutgers. I just wanted to say, cue everyone's tweeting how Steve Peichel is doing this amazing job at Rutgers when they will almost assuredly finish last place again in the Big Ten. And then the only other thing that we haven't mentioned of note is that late last night, Yoli Childs announced he is coming back to BYU. This would be even more impactful if Elijah Bryant was coming back, but he signed with an agent. So BYU should be okay for like the second or third straight year, but probably no NCAA tournament given the constraints of having Gonzaga in your conference.
Yeah, we can kind of go deeper on this at some point this offseason, just because I think it's like a more general thing about basketball than it is about Yoli Childs or Eric Mika or Elijah Bryant. I'm starting to have a tough time believing that BYU can ever become that make the NCAA tournament every year program again. And not that I don't think Dave Rose is a bad coach. I think he's a good coach. He's a really good recruiter in particular. But when you have these guys who have like NBA futures, none of them are going to stay in school for 4 years with a mission trip and be in college at 23, 24. It's just such a disadvantage for the NBA process. We saw Mika leave early. We saw Bryant. I thought Childs would leave as well. He stays. So that's a big break. But I start to wonder if they kind of have to be that small underdog-y team with guys like Tyler and TJ Hawes, with guys like Nick Emery. That has to be their base of kind of smaller combo guards who can just score rather than having these kind of like legit NBA prospects. You never want to turn away an NBA prospect if they want to come, but it just becomes so difficult to keep these talents year after year.
Totally agree. And maybe a move back to the Mountain West could help them. But I mean, if Gonzaga goes too, kind of the same problem, but maybe the Mountain West opens up more bids. The bottom is certainly stronger in the Mountain West than in the WCC.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to watch what happens with BYU over the next couple of years. They will open with Nevada, I believe, next year. That should be an exciting tilt. We will see what happens there. Brad, I think that's all I have. Is that all you got? We had a lot of fun on this one. It was pretty deep. We went on a bunch of shit or stuff. I apologize for my foul language on this podcast for our underage listeners. We touched on a lot, and glad to have kind of gone over all of it. I almost feel like I'm forgetting something, but I don't know what it would be. So I think I can probably wrap this one up.
Yeah, I think it was a ton of fun. I think we definitely touched on everything. I'll make sure for for next week to take copious notes when it happens. When each event happens, instead of the night before trying to think of everything that happened over the week. So we'll be 100% sure that we did not miss anything.
Absolutely. Well, everyone can enjoy their NBA draft combine tweets from every college basketball and NBA writer. Enjoy your hopefully lovely weather this beautiful mid-May, and enjoy or try to enjoy life without college basketball for several more months. It's back on November 6th. Brad and Kevin's favorite teams, the Siena Saints and the Providence Friars, will be facing off with each other to open the season as part of the Hall of Fame tip-off. So I'm looking forward to that. There might have to be a short podcast just to preview that game. Even though it will be a blowout, Siena will be losing big. It should be a fun one. Bragging rights on the line. If the Saints win, I'm gonna be going nuts.
Yeah, I mean, Providence is always good for at least 2 bad, damaging losses every year. So maybe you'll get lucky and you'll get a turn to sport that on Providence's resume under the bad loss section.
Well, given that Siena went 8-24 and just lost their 4 best players from this year's team, I am not overly confident. But in Jamie we trust. Jamie Christian has assembled a good staff. He's got 2 recruits already from New York programs. We'll see what he can do. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that does it.